Hello, everybody. Last week, in between everything else going on, I was up in San Francisco for GDC, the Game Developers Conference, and something I've really enjoyed doing every year since EasyAlly started. And I guess it's kind of, I'll start off, it's just kind of my GDC philosophy because I take it in a very different sense than other shows.
Sure.
Because when we were game trailers, the years that I went to GDC, many of those years I never even really saw GDC itself. There were just all these demo appointments in various hotels and lobbies and things like that. So I never even saw the show floor.
PAX can be like that
some
too.
years.
Yeah, you can like not be at the show all day and see like 8 games.
I feel like in the early GT days, the philosophy was so different, where it was like, go on the floor, get gameplay capture of as many things as you can, whereas now it's a little bit more hear things, say impressions.
Yeah, and I'm steering the entire ship for this now, but you know that like weird moment before EasyAlly started, and I was able to go to GDC by myself without any agenda or plans or anything, you know, and just sleeping on a friend's hotel room floor. I was like, oh, I see what GDC is now, and it's just so much more of a like community family vibe, and everyone's there to just, you know, learn from each other and see what everyone's doing. And so when I schedule this show, even though I've got like 100 emails coming at me of people wanting me to see their games, I'm like, well, no. First, I'm gonna go through this crazy list of sessions because, you know, GDC is primarily about learning from each other, learning how people did things, learning how people are doing things and working through things, and just different topics affecting the industry. And, you know, there are tracks for audio teams and tracks for designers and just all of these different things. And there are times where there's literally like 20 to 30 sessions happening within the same hour. And this is going on for like, you know, 4 or 5 days. And I only go for the last 3 days. So the first thing I do is I kind of go through that session scheduler and like figure out, okay, what are the sessions that I kind of want to see? And then, okay, well, you know, 10 of those are happening at the exact same time, so pick one of each of those. And then once I sort of get my sessions laid out and sort of like, okay, they'll like cement down, like, this is pretty much, I really don't want to compromise on this, but then these others, maybe I'll give or take. And then I'll go through and figure out, okay, what game demos are available that I want to see. And then also leaving enough space because I want to just talk to people. And, you know, some of those demos that I set up is like, maybe I don't care about the game so much, but I haven't seen that person in 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'll get the chance to hang out for a bit afterwards. So the first day was largely a Nintendo day, and I talked a lot about that stuff with Damiani on Friendcode. But like again, as soon as I got in, got my press pass, got some coffee. Who's in the press room? Andre from Game Explain.
Nice.
So sit down and talk to him while I drink my coffee, and then we went over and did a Nintendo thing together where I saw, you know, guys from Kotaku and Variety and Jeff Keighley and just like all kinds of people.
Yeah, I feel like I've just coincidentally kind of run into Game Explain people time and again in events, and I just have to say, I don't know if they'll see this, but like some of the friendliest people I've met in the industry, and there's very friendly people in this industry, but yeah, always willing to chat and say hello and just always have a good attitude, which is nice. So yeah.
So as I said, we already covered a lot of that Nintendo stuff, but the one thing, it's coming to Switch, but I didn't play it on Switch, and I saw it at a totally different place. I saw a game called Kunai, and I don't know if you've heard about this. It's got kind of a, I mean, it's pixel art, but it's got kind of a monochrome-ish color palette. So it's kind of this off-whitish, light yellow and purple, but then like your weapons and pickups and like attacks are red, and you play, there's like this crazy scene that goes down at the beginning with like lots of like people getting wiped out, and then your character comes out of like this test tank, and you're like this robot with like this little monitor face and these like really cute dumb facial expressions. And you're going around slashing stuff with a katana, and it's Metroidvania, and the feel of it, I kind of feel like playing it feels a little bit similar to Hollow Knight.
Blood, you are mixing a lot of good ingredients.
Yeah.
So, and I think the reason it gives me that impression is it's got a little bit of that sort of physicality to, like, when you hit something, you get push back off of it.
Sure.
And when sometimes, like, you can, like, do a jump and, like, down stab to kind of bounce off of an enemy and do that sort of thing.
Okay, because in Hollow Knight, I love just being able to time and repeatedly down slice something with the nail. Can you do that here? Can you keep bouncing off,
I
guys?
think so.
Okay.
I think it's set up
All
to
right.
be able to do that.
This is a good game.
But it sounds like more of a cheerier vibe than Hollow Knight, maybe, with the goofy facial expressions, or...
It's weird because it's like the character has goofy facial expressions, but then again, like, there's, some, blood slashing across the screen. And
Right.
So I'm curious exactly where the tone will end up in the long run, because it does feel like there's not as much explaining to things going on. You're just kind of discovering the world as you go through it. And then where the title of the game comes in, Kunai, very quickly, at least in the demo, which feels like the beginning of the game, although a lot of times demos kind of mix things together, you get a kunai with, like, a rope attached to it. And so it's sort of like a grappling hook to where you toss it into the ceiling and, like, pull yourself up. And so
Now
you
you're
can
speaking my
swing.
language. Go on.
Yeah, sometimes it can, like, wrap around objects. And then very quickly after that, you get a second one.
Mm-hmm.
So both of your shoulder buttons are these rope swing kunai. So you can, like, work your way up like a corridor, like shaft, like that. And it feels really good. You kind of reel yourself in with them. And the story part of the demo didn't last too long, but then they also let me know about the time trial. And the cool thing about the time trial is that there are some other abilities in there to experiment with. So there's, like, a dash that lets you kind of go through, like, thin walls, and there's a double jump. And then the last little crazy thing that they showed is dual submachine guns. And when you if you jump and use the dual submachine guns, you'll actually hover for a second.
Okay, I remember you talking about this. Yeah,
so
somebody
just, like,
was explaining that, right?
Shoot down, shoot down, shoot down, and, like, you can, like, lengthen your jump across a gap doing that.
Is it like, was the platforming really tricky? Like, was it perilous? Did you die a lot trying to get around? Or is that just kind of
Not
fun
yet.
to
No,
navigate?
it felt like very much like working your way up. Like, there are some surfaces that the kunai couldn't attach to, so you'd have to find other ways.
When you were fighting enemies and as you were traversing, were these guys dying in a single hit? Did you have to chip them down? Were there different strategies that you had to employ, like did you have to mix up your weapons, or was it pretty straightforward?
I think, for where I was at, it was pretty straightforward. There were definitely, like I said, there are guys that, you would attack just standing, and then there are others that you would jump and
Sure.
knock down to get across gaps and spike pits and that
Gotcha.
kind of thing. So,
Cool.
but yeah, so that was cool. And just in terms of, like, how the game felt, one of my, like, highlights, I think, from the things that I played. Really want to dig into that a little bit more and explore some of those things you're asking about, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Who is making it?
It's .emu, but I think it's like a sub-label, like they call the Arcade Crew. So I think they're trying to keep the .emu more towards the stuff that they're working on, like Wonder Boy and Streets of Rage, and, like, Arcade Crew is more of, like, this is our original IP kind of thing.
It's funny because you're talking about it and all of the things sound great, and I really won't know until I get my hands on it. But I just think about the Metroidvania kind of genre and how just it is flooded with great things. And when you're comparing something to Hollow Knight, it's like, okay, well, that's a pretty high standard for me. Did you feel like it met that? Did you feel like it was kind of on the level of some of these great games that have come out recently?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be all the way on the level of Hollow Knight.
Hollow Knight scale.
Yeah, it's
How
kind
many
of
Hollow
hard.
Knights is it?
Yeah.
And maybe it won't be as long as Hollow Knight, which I don't know. Like, Hollow Knight may be too long, for what it is. But
Sorry. I mean, it's Hollow Knight is something where it's like it's hard for me to like hear anything bad about it.
Right.
It's not like rational or reasonable.
But I mean, as someone who doesn't play a lot of those games, what I've noticed in the genre, just from like watching gameplay stuff, is just the speed. You know, when I think of like, you know, the days of me playing Symphony of the Night, it just seems like with Ori and the Blind Forest, like you're just moving so fast.
Yeah.
So when you talk about grappling hooks and hovering with machine guns, like what would excite me is that it's like even if I have to backtrack or I'm just kind of searching to see if I can find secrets, it helps to just get through the map a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So sounds like that's kind of what they're going for.
And not to just keep bringing up Hollow Knight, it's just such a big point of reference for me, but you mentioned like you're this cute robot who's making awesome facial expressions, and Hollow Knight is a very difficult game, but I think the reason like why I was so eager to tackle those challenges is because the aesthetic of the world and the characters was so appealing.
Yeah.
It sounds like this game is mixing a lot of different elements together. Did you think that was pretty cohesive and blended together well? Like, did it make sense? With the world?
Again, with the with the color scheme and stuff, there's a very particular vibe that they're going for, almost like a Game Boy-ish kind of vibe, even though it's not quite that.
Sure.
And then they're doing some other special effects. Like I noticed at one point where there was like a light, and so like when you pass through the light, like you kind of like the yellow turned to purple or whatever. So like you're casting shadows. So look, they're doing some cool stuff in there.
Cool.
And then I played some more Switch games that day, which are also in friend code. And then I went to the GDC Awards in the evening, which is just fun. They do the IGF Awards first, and then they do the GDC Awards afterwards. Indies were taking it. It was surprising ways at GDC this year. At times I'm like, maybe not. Like, that's really good, but maybe not.
What was the most puzzling one to you? Yeah.
I mean, just talking about,
there.
I think when you talk about, like, in, like, an audio category, and you're like, you have Celeste versus God of War, and it's like, okay, like, you've got a couple of people in there for Celeste, and then you've got, like, 15 or 20 people doing audio on God of War. Right. And, like, not just, like, by the numbers, but it's just, like, the amount of more that has to be thought through and dialogue.
I just imagine this
and everything
auditorium
else,
of applause and Bloods.
Yeah.
Well, no, even the Celeste team were just like, how?
Yeah.
How do we just be God of War right now?
But man, I think that Celeste soundtrack is pretty phenomenal.
Yes,
I did actually see on social media some people posting like selfies and stuff, and they're like, "I won an award!" Like I was not expecting that. I don't know if it's audio or whatever, but that's whenever we hand out awards at the beginning of the year, looking back at last year, like I love that. I don't think there's ever like the right game of the year, the right award, to give out. It's just fun to honor.
And this is a
amazing work.
distinctly different place for that because
Definitely.
these are developers.
Sure.
However, I don't know the actual politics of who gets to vote and all of that, but they are essentially your their peers.
Yeah.
Right.
Deciding these things. And one of the cool things about being there is that afterwards I could go up to the Celeste team and say, like, congratulations, I've been listening to this a lot when I write, and just move on. But and then chatted with Craig Miller and some other people there as well. And then
Good name drop.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it was funny too because he was like, "Are you going to the after party?" I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "It's like, well, you have a wristband." I was like, "Yeah, sure," but I didn't know about the after party. I started walking down the street with them and like, all I've had to eat today are some Swedish fish, so I'm gonna go over to Mel's and get something with some gravy on it. So.
As cocky as I feel every E3 that it's just right in our back door and we can just stroll down the street to E3, GDC turns around like, oh, damn it. Gotta get on a plane.
So then day two was more of my day to get into some sessions. And the first one was one of my non-negotiables. Like, I have to see the Project xCloud. So this is basically Microsoft's, same thing that Google Stadia is doing, essentially. And it was so funny because, we were getting a lot of flack from people. They were like, "Oh no, this presentation was meant for developers, etc." And I was like,
Stadia specifically.
Yes, Stadia's. And I'm like, I don't know. This really wasn't media enough. And then like Microsoft's presentation, 100% for developers. I'm like, they're talking about this is how you do this. Like here are the lines of code that go on there.
Cool.
And talk, and at the same time, like not really going into sort of that high level, consumer side of the strategy, other than to say like, hey, we're starting to ship this hardware to our Azure data centers now. And so sort of similar to how like Google talked about their backbone, Microsoft also talked about their backbone with like 54 data centers around the world. But they got a lot, they spent a lot of their time really talking about making that library make sense on, playing on a phone or whatever, and, adapting those things. And I'm trying to think about some of the, one of the things is that, they'll maybe get the high-end PC games down the line, but right now they're focusing on the Xbox library and basically making the games that already exist, they're cloud aware, so they know that they'll be that you're playing them on a cloud. And so when developers make these updates, they don't have to go through a crazy update process. They don't really have to go through certification again. They can just add these tags in there so that the game knows, okay, I'm on the cloud and I'm going to adapt for these, cloud-specific features that developers have put into me. And so they talked about, some simple things like font sizes. And then they got into like actual controls and control schemes. And what was really funny is when I'm in this session, I was trying to like tweet out a lot of photos, and I put up a lot of photos from sessions while I was there to kind of show people in real time. But in this particular room, in like the center of the building, my internet was like going really slow. And so like I'm taking these photos and I'm uploading them, and then they're taking forever to upload. And so like the first photo I put up, people are reacting to it while Microsoft is basically like denouncing it. So like the first thing I put up was this crazy photo with like every Xbox controller button on the phone at the same time. And people are like, that's terrible. And meanwhile, Microsoft is basically telling developers, hey, you probably don't want to do this.
Right.
This is the default. This works, quote unquote. But this is really not, what you want to do for your games. And so they showed, first they showed Cuphead, where they basically took off like all the analog sticks and shoulder buttons, and like here's just a D-pad and the face buttons. It wasn't Cuphead first, it was Dead Cells. And then they went to Cuphead, and they're like, well, what is an A button, a B button? That doesn't mean anything to anybody. So why don't you just label your buttons like shoot and jump? Oh. And they also talked about like being able to toggle the shoot button, since you're just always mashing a lot in Cuphead anyways. You can just like click, okay, it's going to auto fire, or you're going to charge shot, and that kind of thing.
Oh.
So like really specializing the controls.
Oh, okay.
And then they went into, okay, so what if I'm playing Halo, right? So with Halo, what they're talking about is this ability to be able to put in different tags to change the context. So you have one set of controls on the screen when you're running around and shooting, and then as soon as you get on the Warthog, the controls change to driving controls. And then as soon as you get into the menus, the controls automatically adapt to be what you would expect from a phone. So you just tap on the menus rather than clicking through them like pretending you have a controller.
Right.
And like you do pinch controls on the map to zoom in and all of that. So like just a lot of like really thinking things through, even though this isn't necessarily the ideal way to play, even though it's still compatible with the controller, which they showed off before, using a controller with like a little phone thing on clipped to it.
Right.
But just, saying that like, thinking these things through, because this is something. And me and some other journalists, we were just waiting for them to mention a Switch, but it wasn't to be yet.
That's funny.
That's such a fascinating thing, like having them kind of take this on a game-by-game basis, but I just think of like scale eventually and how difficult it will be to be like, okay, well, we needed to have adaptive controls for this game and then this other game in this completely different genre. Like, it just seems like so much work, and it seems like games just releasing them on a console or a PC is a lot of work, and then to then go and try to have adaptive controllers or have it make sense on all these different types of platforms. Like, there's part of me that just is thinking like, how feasible is this really? And like, especially in a game like Cuphead, right, which is an incredibly difficult game. I feel like I want to give myself every advantage that I can. And so if I know, like, yeah, you can play it on phone, but you're going to do a lot better if you're in front of a TV with a controller.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that you could just use a controller on these different platforms, but it's like, why would I ever, like, you're putting in all of this work for these different controls, and it's like, why would I use that if it's not the best?
Yeah, but here's one of the things they started with that's, kind of blows our minds a little bit, is that there's a generation growing up that's playing on phones before they're playing on controllers.
Right.
And so it's actually not a thing for them in a lot of cases to be able to play this way. And so just kind of, and the other fact that, if you're going to play on your phone, most people aren't going to be dragging a controller around with them.
That's true, but I guess the thought against that would be that the types of games that they're growing up with are, in a lot of ways, very different than the types of games that we're playing and using with a controller.
Yeah, and I think all around,
just a little bit of a
like Cuphead is probably not the best thing to try to play with the latency.
Right.
But I think they did talk about that, though, about, that they'll have all these tools to be able to simulate latency, simulate different kinds of problems that can happen online. So developers can, like, test these different scenarios and kind of program their game to kind of account for them. One of the other things they talked about is I relate it. I don't know why this is the thing that came to mind, but I relate it mostly to Majora's Mask. And so essentially, say if the player gets disconnected because the signal drops or whatever, it will create a save, a restore point on the server. So, like, as soon as you come back to the game, you're right there. But for the developers, it's like, well, maybe, saving is part of how your game's challenge works.
Right.
So, like Majora's Mask, when the player reconnects, then that save file you can flag it to be automatically deleted. So you can't just, like, save scum it and just keep coming back to that point over and over again.
Cool.
My big thing, too, is also, when you talk about customizing these games, the game that we know, so it's the same relative Cuphead where the controls might change or the HUD might change, but it's still the same music, the same bosses, the same levels. What really excites me when we're starting to think of, like, taking all these gaming experiences on the go is not like I am playing the exact same experience now on mobile, but say if you had something like Apex Legends, I don't have to download the mobile version of it. We're all playing Apex, but I'm actually doing something completely different. I'm controlling a drone or something, or I'm doing something totally different. Yeah. And, like, I'm playing Division 2 right now, and it's the drop-in, drop-out nature of that game is so easy. It's so easy to just be like, I want to help people, or I need help. And it would be fun if, like, some kind of entity or some player came into your game and I knew, like, oh, that person's playing on a phone, or that person's playing on an iPad, or that, like, they're just looking at this gaming universe in a whole different way instead of, like, oh, no, it's, I'm trying to play Cuphead with a D-pad I can't feel, like, that's weird to me, or Dead Cells especially, like, that's not
like
ideal. Google,
they talked about matchmaking based on, like, people that are in the same data center as you, improving that. I think, to me, where I feel like Xbox has the advantage in this is that there's already kind of an ecosystem and there's already a lot of stuff built in, like, just like stuff like what they were talking about, like being able to do the touch controls, like that. They said that basically already, like, just works because they already equated mouse and pointer controls in Windows. And so, like, it basically just, whoop, there it is. And I think similarly, things like what they've done with Play Anywhere, where, like, I stop playing on the Xbox and I pick up my save file on the PC, like, just integrating that into the cloud is going to be really easy. So I really hope that, the idea for Xbox will be, and they haven't said this yet, but I hope that their idea will be that, like, okay, the games that you own digitally, you'll just have them available on the cloud. Like, you don't have to worry about a separate subscription or a separate service or anything. Like, as an Xbox Live Gold member, this is just another way that you can access your games because Play Anywhere doesn't cost anything more.
Right.
Yeah.
And same thing with Games Pass. It's like, you've got Games Pass, okay, play them from the cloud. And so to me, that it's more exciting to me to see that as an additive benefit.
Oh, sure.
you know, to where like I don't have to take my Xbox
Yeah.
with me at Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can just play whatever, you know, like especially if it's like something like Persona, where it's like
Right.
I'll just play that whenever.
Yeah, that changes the whole dynamic because
Yeah.
then it just changes a lot of things because you're going to be way less lenient where it's like, okay, you're not having me take an extra step, you're not taking anything away from me, you're only giving me something, and so you're just purely framing it in a positive way. And the second thing is that like Xbox has already carved out so many things that really only they're doing in this super specific way with like Game Pass and now this, and then how they've been integrating PC stuff for a long time. And so it just, to me, gives them this huge advantage of the next generation where it's like, well, why wouldn't you pick Xbox? Look at all you're getting. Look at how much work they're doing to make playing games as easy as possible. Yeah, that's
Whereas,
awesome.
you know, I think to me the hard sell with Google Stadia is like, how do I buy it? You said I buy a game.
Right.
So I'm buying like a game just for your platform. So
Right.
like now we've got Steam and Epic and Discord and Google.
Right.
Like, you know, and now the Apple thing as
Right.
well. So yeah. The next session I went to, and I actually love this. Got over my head a bit. And again, like some of these things.
And
at
you're a tall
GDC
man. That's tough. I have to. Sorry.
but it was
You're right.
basically about it was from Bluepoint. It was about Shadow of the Colossus remake,
Cool.
Yes.
and kind of going through their whole process of doing this, as well as like some of their company philosophies. Number one of which is super bold, that every project has to be better than the last one.
Yeah.
And I like have that as like a core value of your company, man. It's like after a while that's gonna get hard.
Yeah, that is not our philosophy. For sure.
But it's crazy because they talk about, you know, the baseline is taking that retail disc and essentially like reconstructing it, and like going through the code and getting it running on original hardware and really just digging in and understanding like how does this game work, how does this game function, how does it all like interconnect to itself, and then from there they start making their code changes to start working towards the new platform, and like really doing so in a very meticulous way so that they can easily like track like, okay, we changed this and we changed that. And
See, that I feel like that almost sounds deceptively simple because
Right.
time and again I've heard when people try to remaster things or remake things that for a very long period of time, like preservation of that stuff or meticulous note-taking or just general like organization of the games that they made was so sloppy that I think it's kind of a miracle that they can even go to that level and disassemble it in the way that they do. That is extremely fortunate, I think. Did they talk about that process at all? Of like, well, you know, here there was like a gap or something that we didn't have that we really needed.
I mean, from the way it sounds, like they don't even go through that. Like they're working off of a retail disc.
Oh, I see.
And
I
like
see.
recompiling it, like
Wow.
figuring out like how all the different parts work and how all the code works together.
And so there's no guide at all. It's just they're taking this thing. It's like deciphering a language. Yeah.
Yeah, and they said their goal is to
Sleuthing it.
is to release the game that the original developers would have released had they had access to the modern hardware.
That's what their stuff feels like. That's it's why it's so exciting.
Yeah.
When you hear that name pop up.
And then so basically where it gets really kind of crazy is they refer to it as the dance, is they will actually have the original game code running, and then they will start moving things over to their Bluepoint engine. And so they'll start saying, okay, original game, you don't have anything to do with sounds. The Bluepoint engine is going to do sounds. You know, these assets, no, you're not going to even touch these assets. It's going to refer to this over here. So basically they have the original game as it was programmed running in like its bubble, and then alongside of it, their engine running all the new stuff in its own bubble. And so it's like, that's why it feels so right. It's because the original game is still there.
Yeah.
It's still inside of this thing in a wrapper.
Wow.
Yeah. And they are talking about, sometimes like running into like bugs that might actually still be in that original code. And like, well, go back, to the PlayStation 2 debug and get it running on there and see what's happening. And try to fix it from there. Try to fix it in the original game engine rather than doing it in the Bluepoint engine. I'm trying to think about what else is here. They're talking about one of the crazier ones that they did was Titanfall Xbox 360.
Oh, sure.
Where they were taking a 5 gigabit or gigabyte, I don't remember which one it was, Xbox One game to 512 megabit Xbox 360 game and just like shrinking it down. It's like, and that's where they got in over my head is he just started going through like slide after slide of like optimizing memory usage and like getting rid of like this spike to the CPU that would happen at the start of the frame,
Wow.
Like how much memory gets used per every frame, and like a lot of these things, these same processes just keep happening, and it's like evening that out and just like basically like cleaning up the code as much as possible so it runs as well as they can possibly get it.
A question that I have for something like Shadow of the Colossus is, it is obviously incredibly faithful to the original game, but it does have a new look to it, right? Like they did change it, they did update it, and I'm just curious with kind of having the soul of that original game inside of it still, like how does that process work? Like how much do they have to iterate to kind of update it without going too far? Like what is that kind of like exploration?
One of the things that they said is that like they had to do a lot of bug testing just in like improving the frame rate because the original game never even ran at 30 frames per second.
Yeah, notoriously.
So getting it to 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, all of a sudden things stopped working. Like all of a sudden you couldn't climb on a Colossus.
Whoa.
Just like making changes like that like really ends up throwing things off. Wow. And they're talking about, well, they didn't feel like they were the areas they weren't changing to any crazy degree, but all of a sudden, putting trees in here or putting in more vegetation, then all of a sudden like lizards end up under the landscape or birds start, not being able to get into the zone because of trees or something, and there's like having to like alter the pathfinding and things like that. But yeah, like I said, a lot of it really, it's actually surprising how much detail there was on just memory optimization and very specific methods of what they're doing and how they're changing that towards like, I don't even know if I can take notes at this point. I'm done. I'll try to just like ride this wave.
Yeah. It sounds like a really fascinating presentation though.
Yeah.
For sure.
And they did, what was interesting though, and if you go to my Twitter, you can see a lot of the slides from these presentations. What was interesting is they did talk about how already like they're radically changing things on their next project, like already taking things to the next level, doing more stuff in the Bluepoint engine.
We have evolved.
Yeah. And they're saying that like the current project that they're working on, they're calling it more of a re-envisioning than just a remake. And kind of, I guess the kind of the example he was talking about is like, it's like you kind of look out at that, that green polygon in the distance and you imagine what it is. And they have to kind of fill in those gaps to like make it more. But he was teasing it, and he like went to the slide. And it's like classified, like not saying what it is yet.
Yeah. Did they talk at all about kind of like how when they're changing things, or in this new case, re-envisioning things, like what the approval process is, like how much of a back and forth is?
No, they really didn't get into that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of times, because we think of everything in such like a visual sense, like you're expecting a lot of, very detailed things on the art. And he didn't really go into that too much either, other than showing like, here's the PS2 version, here's the PS3 version, here's the PS4 version.
Gotcha.
So that like you can really see the difference of what they did. But again, very interesting, fascinating talk.
Definitely.
From there, I went to see a game over in Epic's booth called Last Oasis. I don't know if you are familiar with this, if you've seen the videos.
I don't think so.
So it's basically, it's an MMO in which I think the most distinct thing is there's like these like wooden walker things.
Okay.
So like basically like tanks with legs and big old wings flapping around and stuff.
Okay.
But I think one of the things that they're kind of going for is kind of an EVE Online, kind of lots of like specialization and like trading and resources.
Whoa.
I feel like that's an expensive thing to go after.
Yeah.
You don't hear that often.
We're going to go after that EVE Online.
Yeah.
Cool.
But the basic premise.
Think EVE Online with wood.
The basic premise is essentially that the Earth has stopped rotating, and so there at any given time there's just like this strip of land that's getting the proper amount of sunlight, and then as the planet goes around the sun, that strip of land moves. So you can establish your territory or whatever, but at some point, A, it's going to run out of resources, and B, the map is going to shift somewhere else, and
I
then
think
you're
that's
going to
a
have
pretty awesome idea.
to get on these walkers and move base and reclaim new territory.
So when you're establishing this land, when you're staking your claim, is it a very personal, like, hey, I'm in this crazy situation, I'm just trying to survive on my own, or are you like a group of people? Are you a society?
It
of
sounds like there's a
players?
bit of both,
Okay.
and kind of they talked about really wanting to have that aspect of, letting players again work out their relationships of like, do you trust this person to take care of your base while you're gone?
No.
You're right, but that's one of the main things that they wanted to problem solve with this game is that they think that it's really lame, and one of these kind of persistent games that you could just go to bed at night and then somebody can raid your base and destroy it, and in the morning you've got to wake up and deal with the consequences and pick up the pieces. So essentially, what you can do here is you can pack up your base and put it into your walker, and then just take your walker off into essentially a safe zone. So it can be like really hardcore while you're online, but then you can walk away from it and come back to it, and you have everything, and you continue,
Right.
maybe not where you left off because everyone's moved on, but going forward, and then probably a lot of resources to like build like the really big walkers. They kind of started me off with, just controlling one of these things and like battling another one, and it's like you can be on the controls, and then you've got like one guy up here on this kind of gun and another guy. So it's almost like ship or combat kind of thing, to where you're trying to get around, and I think you can even take advantage of the wind, because I think that's what the flaps are for, the wings are for. It sounds like everything's like running off of like wind and water as like kind of main resources, and then you can even grapple over to the enemy's walker and like fight hand-to-hand combat. But they're saying that like, well, if you want to be a trader, you can like try to avoid combat altogether and just work with people on that level. The hand-to-hand combat itself, I wasn't very good at, just because I'm not familiar with those systems, because they're emulating essentially like the Mountain Blade style. Okay. So where it's like you kind of like swipe, and you swipe the mouse.
You're a little clumsy, I can see.
Yeah. So you like swipe the mouse to like set your direction.
Okay.
So like do a down slash or a side slash, or defend in the opposite direction, kind of For Honor. But yeah, so I think there's a lot going on.
Yeah,
a lot going on with that
lot.
game.
Yeah.
It feels like a game. One of those games like, well, this is what I'm gonna do for the next
just the
6
word
months.
just MMO gets my heart beaten. You don't hear that very often.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I think sometimes with these games that sound very high concept and free form, I think the problem that I run into sometimes is like the ideas are there and conceptually they're really cool, but just because it's so expansive, no one particular element is particularly excellent, such as movement or combat.
Sure.
Or, but I mean, it sounds like if they're making like hand-to-hand combat that intricate, I don't know. Like, I'm curious to see how it would feel.
They also briefly showed me some of the skill trees, and we're talking about how they want skill trees to be like really hardcore decisions as well. So like you won't be able to get everything. You have to figure out like what kind of character you want to build. They want to put a lot of effort into that. The walkers themselves have different specialties, so you can have a combat focused walker, or you can have or one that's more focused on gathering resources or claiming territory or just transportation. And they even showed you can even make like small walkers that are basically just for getting around, and it's just like pedal powered. So it's just like you're essentially on a motorcycle, but it's this crazy wooden thing that looks like it's made out of Connects or something.
Wow.
Cool.
The next one I played, full disclosure, DeMagnete.
Yeah.
Which we revealed on the Easy Allies podcast.
Yeah.
So I got to do that and squeeze my face into a VR headset and get to try it out. And it's essentially a first-person puzzle game. I think really easy to compare it to Portal, but with magnets and magnetic cubes. And I just played the first kind of couple tutorial chapters. And so basically you have like a blue and red polarity. And so, I think the opposites attract, if I'm remembering it right. So like if you push the blue blue controller at the red cube, it will come towards you. If you push it at the same cube, it will push away. But then the cubes themselves will either attract or repel each other as well. So you're just trying to work with a lot of just kind of pressure plate puzzles.
But all the stuff you're manipulating is in the environment itself. Like you just have these two, plus minus basically for your appendages, but you don't carry a block with you, or you're not like spawning these things. You're going into the environment, so you don't have like a gun like Portal. Like it's just these abilities.
Right. Yeah. So the blocks will be there. I think you can carry the block from one room into another. Although I think I broke the game at one point doing that the wrong way. But I remember the one that I could remember is that the button was like on the ceiling, and so what I had to do is I had to toss one of the cubes on top of that box essentially, and then it pulled the other block up to it, and stuff like that. And I think. What's really cool about it is it feels like there's not always like a set way to solve things. It just like work with the physics until you get the pressure plates pushed, and then now you can go through the door, and now you can go to the next room.
Cool.
Is it playful? Because Portal's playful. Like Portal has some tricky puzzles that you have to solve, but just like it's fun to just kind of look at around the environment. It's fun to just like shoot one on the ceiling and one on the floor and fall through forever.
Yeah.
Like, does it kind of have that playfulness where you're just like, whoa, that thing moved really fast. I'm going to do that again. Not to solve the puzzle, but just that's cool. And VR
there's
too.
Definitely
I never got
some
Portal in
amount
VR.
of like I think the physics on them is convincing enough to where it is fun to just like throw this in the air and then grab it, and so that works. There was a little bit of a narrator, but I didn't feel like it wasn't like GLaDOS or anything, or it was like constantly jokey or anything. And plus, I was still very, again, like tutorial stages. So if I'd played it a bit more, I might have seen more about that.
I feel like kind of a make or break point with these is just kind of not just the puzzles themselves, but what's going on visually. Like what sort of environments are you in? Is it very sterile? Is it very colorful?
It's a lot of it is caves, so it's like going down elevators into these cave areas.
One spot in the trailer that they sent us looked like the interior of a volcano.
Oh,
so there's a lot of like elemental stuff at play. And when Blitz said full disclosure, they were a sponsor of the Easy Allies podcast.
Yeah,
Thank you, DeMagnete.
Gotcha. Cool.
But yeah, so I definitely I think I need to play more of it, but I did like what I played.
Nice.
And I think the other thing too is just for me, like I'm still VR games are still hard for me because of my glasses. It's still like I have to stop because my glasses are like squeezing into my face and I don't know what to do about it right So the next thing I did is I went to a session on why fashion sucks in most games.
I saw you tweet about this.
And why it matters or whatever.
Title bait, how do you not go?
Yeah.
You know.
It was only a
ready to get
30-minute
salty.
session, but it was pretty fun. It was and I think.
So who was conducting this?
And what did they wear?
Yeah.
Her name is Victoria Tran. I think she's working on Boyfriend Dungeon.
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so she had some shots in there, but she just feels like fashion is ignored as a mechanic, and she was talking about how when she was growing up, she was kind of again like the nerd kid or whatever. It's like, oh no, fashion's not important, but then she found herself like playing all these dress-up games, and talking about how fashion can be a form of expression and can have all these like mechanical payoffs, and just how much it can say about a character. And so she used the doctor from Persona 5, as an example. And it's like, okay, you can see that she's a doctor, but she's not a normal doctor because she's got these high heels on, she's got like these accessories, this like choke collar and all of that, and just saying just how much. Just again, like that first impression can make, and then how sometimes, if it's not right, it just like leaves you confused. And she talked about Rex from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and she's like, "What exactly is this? What is he wearing?"
Yeah.
It's like I guess it's a diving suit, but why and what is it really communicating? And then.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones that always kind of bugged me a little bit, because it's a game that I never really put like enough time into, was Final Fantasy X, because every character seemed just so like locked into what they were wearing, and then they would go to a completely different environment and like wear the same exact outfit. I think that was like around the PS2 is when I started to notice, like, I look forward to games when, that's why I love Red Dead. You'll like put the coat on, and you're like, oh no, you're in the cold now. You need to change your outfit.
Man, Brendan, it's hard for me to. Like, I see that two ways. I can see just like looking at it and having that like disparity kind of bother you, but then you like think about Final Fantasy X and its story, and it's like, well, it's about being thrown in another world where you are at a place, and so like that
and these characters are so iconic,
right? And like,
in their outfits.
That clashing is supposed to make sense because they go into it. So yeah, it's hard, but I don't know. You gotta on some level, you have to have some base visual appeal to get people to that understanding in the first place.
And then another good example that she said was great was Hitman 2.
Yes.
And the costumes and just like all the things that you can do in there.
Yeah.
And again, going back to, fashion as mechanics and how there can just be a lot of different ways to use that.
Although I love in Hitman 2 when you're pretending to be somebody else, and it's just a bald guy with a cowboy hat. He's like, oh, it's my friend I've known for years.
Sure, yeah. That could, sometimes they play with that. And just talking about, how it can be used for self-expression, but a lot of that now is getting more limited because, of microtransactions, and so like that can be a good thing for developers, but not necessarily, because if your players can't really access that, then they don't really have the means to like kind of show off their own personality.
Did she, I guess, talk at all about, because I think sometimes what bothers me is where you just sort of like you see a fantasy game, let's say, and this is not true of all fantasy games. I'm intentionally generalizing here, but I feel like a lot of times where it's like, oh, we're going to introduce this common fantasy enemy, and this is just what it looks like, or this type of not Final Fantasy, but type of fantasy character. This is what it looks like, and you don't really think about it just because it's been used over and over and over again.
Right.
Did she kind of talk about like standardization in fashion in that sense, and like how that can, I guess, be a good thing in a sense that players are familiar with it and recognize it, but a bad thing in the sense that like you get so used to it that we don't really get too experimental with like how we visualize these concepts?
Yeah, I mean, I think she did talk a lot about, things being kind of generic and not like
Yeah.
really telling you anything, or
Right.
like outfits don't feel like they match their personalities. Like she was talking about like Jill Valentine and RE3 and like wearing this tube top, and she's a cop, but she doesn't like, why is she dressed this way? You know, and like I think a lot of that is, you know, she's talking about thinking through why people are dressed the way they are, thinking through like how it can benefit you to communicate. You know, I think Monster Problem was another one that she thought was, you know, a strong example of these creatures. Like they would just be generic creatures otherwise, but by, you know, giving them, you know, different senses of modern fashion, then they're like, oh, okay, then that exhibits their personality a lot more. Same thing with the amount of personality you can exhibit in Splatoon 2.
Right. The Resident Evil 3 example is really interesting to me because, like, I totally see where this person's coming from, where it's like, okay, not the most practical outfit in this situation, but it's become, like, kind of this iconic outfit that kind of carries its own semblance of cool, and I think part of that coolness is just, like, not at all concerned with the practicality. It's just concerned on a visual element, and so, yeah, like, you have to make a sacrifice somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
But she did say, you know, like more than anything, like the purpose is just to think about it.
Sure.
You know, to be like have this on the forefront of your mind.
Yeah.
Don't just like write it off. Like, but be, you know, either be looking through fashion trends yourself, or to have somebody consult on those things. You know, and we've seen like crazy things that Square Enix has done with like, you know, Deus Ex, like actually putting out the jackets and the Final Fantasy crossovers. And
That's what's fun about RE2 Remake is, you know, they updated both of their outfits, but then like if you want the old outfits, they're new too. You know, you'll just be like, no, you don't need sleeves, you're fine.
The next game I played was Eastward, which is a Chinese-developed game that is, it's sort of it's pixel art, kind of Super Nintendo-ish, but it's got, I guess it's kind of more like a top-down, like Zelda-style adventure game, or maybe more like Secret of Mana. I'm not sure how much like leveling up and stuff they have going on. It seemed to be more like they're focusing on like items and abilities, but it's kind of got like a semi-modern kind of 80s-ish vibe going. And so there's two characters that I played as. One was John, who had like a puffy, like Back to the Future looking kind of vest, and then Sam, who had like this like really like oversized sweater. And as you can see, like right after the fashion center, I'm writing down what they're wearing. So you start off kind of in the middle of town, and it kind of gave me a little bit of Shenmue vibes, actually. I think maybe that's like because of that sort of 80s feel, to where like you're just walking through and like talking to kids that are like playing like video games on the side of the road, and seeing some other NPCs there. And then you get into these woods, and the weapon you end up using is like a frying pan.
Sounds like Earthbound a little bit too.
Batting things around with a frying pan. And then Sam, she can like shoot these balls of energy, and so there's a lot of like switching between the two of them to kind of like do like environmental puzzle solving.
Oh, okay.
And so like her energy balls could like clear through some of these enemies, but then with the frying pan, what he could do is like, so he could get on a raft and like charge the frying pan, and then like hit the pole or whatever at the dock, and then send the raft moving. What's that?
No, I love that. I love where it's like, yeah, we're gonna get this raft moving. We're gonna use this frying pan.
Oh, okay. And then while it's starting to be in motion, then you switch to her and then shoot the whatever obstacles in your way so that you could get past them.
Yeah.
And then
this sounds so charming, Blood.
Yeah, like I really like the look of it. That's why I like wanted to get in on it. And then I mean, it was just like a lot, like realistically it was just like a lot of variations of those puzzles and moving around, and I didn't get to see a whole lot of the game, but just a taste.
So when you're you're handling these two different characters, are you like switching between them on the fly? Like, do you have to? Is that part of the challenge? Is kind of alternating between these two characters?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's like figuring out where to put them. So like you can you can direct one of them to like follow you and stick with you, or like you can have them stay where they're at while you walk around and do something else.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I could swap back and forth between the two.
Cool.
Makes me think of Lost Vikings. I want to do a Lost Vikings game.
And then, the next one I went to was for Ben.
Yeah.
Devil May Cry 5 session.
Pull it, blood.
With Itsuno and Matt Walker. And somebody else was there, but he didn't really talk. He was just kind of there in the jacket.
Did you get to talk to Itsuno or Matt Walker at all?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a huge room.
I could say that Matt Walker is a wonderful person, and I assume that Itsuno is also a wonderful person. So.
But yeah, so the kind of framework for this talk was working backwards from emotion. I forget actually whether it was, I think, re-engineering emotions or something like that. Let me figure out where it was. I've got it in here. Game design by reverse engineering emotions. That's exactly how it was titled. Okay. But he was talking about essentially starting with what you want people to feel.
Yeah.
And so it's like, as a game designer, like the best way to get these emotions across is get out there and live life. It's like eat a really great meal, or like travel, or go skydiving, or go to a movie, and he was saying to write down and think through like what you expect that experience to be like before you do it, and then compare how you actually felt afterwards.
Okay.
And then try to like work out in between, like, okay, like what actually prompted that in me. And so then when you are designing whatever part of the game that you're designing, or your cutscenes or whatever, you kind of have a reference, a framework to work off of. And he was talking about when he was young and like watching this like old like robot anime and stuff, these scenes where like the robot that you're used to, like it's struggling and it gets defeated, but then this super cool new robot comes up and it like saves the day, and like everything works out for the best, and that essentially became the theme for DMC5, which was setback and awakening.
Yeah, man, it's so funny that you say that, because I'm thinking about the new things that you get and how characters evolve and how they quite literally power up. Like, that makes so much sense, huh?
Yeah, and I won't get into the details because
right.
He's like, they literally put up a giant spoiler warning, and you're like, if you haven't played the game yet, like start listening to a podcast right now, because they literally walked through all three main characters and like their points of setback and awakening, and how they changed and developed.
That's a pretty meaty presentation too, because like what you're describing is like the beating heart of storytelling. Like, and it's interesting because I think some people, I'm not so much thinking of game developers now. I mean, I guess Naughty Dog, who's like, seems to be so in command of emotion. Like you're into a scene and it's like, I might not be into the scene as much as I was expecting to, or maybe compared to other scenes, but like very clear what you're going for here.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously the relationship in Last of Us, or like playing as a young Nathan Drake, and then just, like visually, being able to choose so many different parts of his life and show them. But I think of like Pixar, and it's just like, I walk out of some of those movies just like, how did they do that? Like, how did they, like, I bet they just knew, like, exactly 5 minute by 5 minute by 5 minute interval, exactly where my head would be at, exactly what expectations I would have.
Well, that's actually one of the things.
Manipulate. They just have my heart in their hands and they can do whatever they want to.
So when he said for the cutscenes and stuff, he said have a clear objective for every scene and every event.
Yeah.
It's like being very, very intentional about every part of it.
I wonder what kind of the disparity, like maybe they don't think about this as much as I think they might think about this, but I feel like Devil May Cry in particular is in this weird situation where like this isn't a remake, it's continuing a story that we've kind of left behind for the last 10 years, right? Where, like, you know, it's picking up Devil May Cry 4, which came out in 2008. But in between that time, we had a reinterpretation of Devil May Cry. And so they want to do these emotions specifically, but there's so much that they kind of have to keep in mind where it's like, okay, we got to communicate to the people that know what's going on immediately. We've got to communicate to the people who maybe haven't been with these characters in this way since Devil May Cry 4, and then we've got to communicate to all new players kind of the same emotion that we want to go for.
Right.
And like having all of those different layers and having it hit with everybody, I can imagine is like a pretty tall task.
Yeah.
So,
well, and one of the things he talked about is, you know, basically when they started, before they started production, they essentially had like a retreat, like a summit, where they went through and like laid it all out. Like they laid out what they were going to do with the game. They laid out what they wanted to do with the post-game content. They laid out, okay, what parts of this will we cut if we're running out of time?
Wow.
You know, like they had it all, you know, planned out in advance. And I think when we watched those previs scenes again, like it was just amazing. Like this is the same scene. It's just with like some guy with a stupid prop and an eagle costume. And so it is pretty nuts how far in advance they thought about all of these things. Another thing that was interesting that he talked about was they kind of shifted the arc for like your character's level of power. And so he's saying like, generally, what we would do in a Devil May Cry game would be around 60 or 70% of the way through the game. Now you're at max power and you have all your abilities, where you're saying in DMC5, let's just pick that all the way at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And so you really don't get to play with all of that stuff unless you go into a New Game Plus.
Well, and different characters are reaching different points of power at different times. And you're switching between all three of them. Yeah. Huh. I'm so jealous that you guys got to talk. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
In so many words. Yeah.
Yeah. And he talked about like the core of action games is about overcoming a difficult challenge. So like one of those things was, you know, make sure that players don't give up.
Right.
You know, but like providing that sense of, you know, accomplishment and relief afterwards, and giving room for you to be able to practice moves, giving you tactile controls, being able to like judge what your enemies are doing. And they showed like a whole bunch of like different concept designs for different enemies, and showed, you know, why they picked which ones, because they felt they were the most clearly communicating like how this enemy is actually going to come at you and how they're going to attack. Another thing they showed was they talked about like success shouldn't be only binary, and they showed this cool graph of DMC4 versus DMC5, where it was I think it's max act. You're probably more familiar with this because I haven't played DMC5 yet, and it's been forever since I played 4. But they were saying that it basically there was just like one slice of like this input range that you would be successful in DMC4. And in DMC5, there's like this broader range. So it's like the same slice where you would get it perfect, but there's a little bit of wiggle room on either side of that, a little bit more on the front and a little bit less on the back, to where you would get, okay, almost perfect means you get almost as much energy. And then a little bit wider beyond that, where you get a little bit of energy. So you can see where you're improving, and you can figure out, like, okay, where my timing needs to get perfected.
Right, and that just encourages you to go after it more and explore it deeper than maybe you would otherwise. Yeah, that's awesome.
And then one thing that was interesting is he kind of sees the high-end graphics as a reason to keep people from giving up. Like, because they're, like, so into, like, how cool this game looks, and like where they're, you know, not only where they're at in the story, but like how, you know, great the enemies, the character designs, the cutscenes look. Yeah. They're like, well, I don't want to give this up because I want to see what's next.
And man, there's this guy on Twitter, I believe his name is Suni Legend, and he does like these just stunning GIFs for all of these games, and like I have to say, like Devil May Cry 5 and Resident Evil 2 is very good as well. But some of the gifts that he made for Devil May Cry 5, it's like, I can't believe you can do this. You can do this in an action game, and B, it looks as good as it does. Like,
Right.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because part of the reward is just how gloriously detailed it looks. That's awesome. That's such a motivation for them. It is amazing that that game looks as good as it does and runs as well as it does. Like, it's a miracle.
Yeah, I was just looking through some of the slides here. But yeah, so that was essentially, in a wrap up, that was the DMC5 session.
Yeah.
After that, I went to.
Did you go up to them and say thank you?
No, I didn't get to.
That's disappointing. All right.
It was a big room. It was probably like 200 or 300 people in the room for that one. The next thing I did in the evening was the Gang Awards, which is the Game Audio Network Guild. So like, like we were talking about, like GDC Awards overall is like developers, and now like get it down to like just audio people and composers. And they have, number one, they have a lot of awards. It takes a while to get through them all. And like just very specific things like, best audio in a mobile game, or best choral arrangement, and things like that. And so it was cool to.
Did you buy any soundtracks after this award ceremony? Did you get?
No, but I wrote down all the winners. I tweeted out all the winners. But the two reasons I like to go to that every year, number one, I like to see people getting recognized who otherwise you wouldn't,
Yeah,
you would never see. Even if it is God of War, for the 15th time, like these are people that necessarily don't even work at Sony Santa Monica. They work with like contracted teams that worked with them in conjunction with them.
It was actually really nice getting Corey on that spoiler mode, because just being able to interact with him like on such a personal level like that, you could just see how much of his life he put into this game and how much it meant to him. And then sometime later seeing him win all of these awards, you could tell every single time like it meant just as much to him.
Yeah.
Like receiving that recognition means so much to these people, and you're totally right. It's cool that we can increase that pool, because there are so many people working in this industry that don't get recognized that totally deserve to.
Yeah. And then the other reason is just to catch up with people that I know are going to be there that I normally, don't get that much of a chance to see. So
these
just
blood connections, man.
Yeah, getting in a quick chat with Austin Wintery, and
must be nice.
Like you do.
Yeah.
And then after that, Ben Hansen from Game Informer
Nice.
actually invited me out to dinner that night. So chatted with him and some other Game Informer peeps, and the developer of Wandersong and a developer Insomniac were there, as well as some other folks that dropped in and out. So that was nice. And the place we went had food, so that was also nice. That I didn't have to go get dinner afterwards.
Man, we better.
It was like an Irish pub.
Oh, okay.
We better be careful about sending Blood on these trips. Like, he's not going to come back one of these days.
I know.
Yeah.
But then the next morning, I did go to the Corey's God of War session, which was really interesting because, while he gave a lot of development insight, the whole arc of it was more or less about pitching the game. Like he talked,
which is so cool, and not something you really think about in terms of development. Just those initial ideas. But it's funny how many like myths have developed over the years. This whole like fictitious elevator scene with that spawned Kingdom Hearts that like didn't really happen, but like everyone believed it, and I believed it. Like we wrote it into the Final Fantasy Retro when we did it, and then I found out later like, well, not really. I mean, it's like the easy way to think about it, but it's really fun to hear, especially with this game that just got so many accolades.
Right.
To have them come up very matter-of-factly be like, imagine a time where this didn't happen. Imagine a time when the concept of making a game just called God of War was terrifying, and there was no assurance whatsoever that this was going to work. I mean, in a lot of sense, it's similar to DMC, where like you're following Devil May Cry 4, and it's like, okay, how can we reinvent the series but make it still true to it at the same time?
Yeah.
And they did such a good job.
So we went from his initial pitches to people at Sony Santa Monica, and then later on to Shuhei and then all the way up through to the initial E3 reveal. And there's that whole process of
cool.
doubting yourself at every step of the way.
Oh, yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Here's the slide from his original pitch. It says, continue the timeline, reinvent the feel, grow the character and the world, play to our strengths but broaden our skills. And then he said these last two, like, he hated both of these points.
Yeah, the very last one's like, wow.
But it's like, this is how I've got to pitch this game.
Do you know what the last one is,
I
Ben?
don't.
It's fantastic.
So, own the action-adventure genre.
Wow.
Right?
Create the game of the year.
I respect it.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is so funny because the team was so humble, you know, they're getting all these
Right.
awards and they're like,
Right.
wow, thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's like, well, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Right.
Anything less would be unacceptable. It's so funny.
He talked about like some of the narrative points about making a simple story but with complex characters. Kratos seeks a fresh start and the player gets one. I thought was an interesting way of putting that. Yeah. And he's talking about breaking the cycle, like not just for Kratos, but for them as a studio to like, we're not just keep making the same game. We're going to, make something that's
We're all
fresh.
having a wonderful experience at Kratos' expense.
Father-son story was like key from the beginning, even though he said it was, so they started in 2013. He didn't have a name for the boy until 2016.
Oh my.
Wow. Just boy.
That's why it's called
Just
Boy.
Boy, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a year after they started, they threw out the story entirely and started over.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Cool though, you know?
Yeah.
And then he's talking about the monster still inside Kratos, but he holds it at bay. So he like used the Hulk as kind of a reference.
Oh. That's a really interesting parallel. I never thought about that.
Yeah. And then, what was it? Teaching in the narrative as well as the gameplay, which I'm not sure. Expounding on that, like where that goes. Trying to think about what else I can put in here that without repeating the whole thing. But one of the things he said that he outlawed kind of among the team was using the words brutal and epic to describe like what they wanted the game to be and try to again think outside the box. Although he said epic had to come back later on.
Right.
He had this crazy little diagram of like get my phone to actually show it.
Yeah, man, epic is such an
pillars.
overused word, like horrendously overused. But there are several moments in God of War where it's like there's no more appropriate word. Like I would have to use the word epic to describe some of those scenes without a doubt.
Okay, so basically, imagine a triangle, right? And so like at the top of the triangle is father and son. On one side they've got combat, on the other side they've got exploration, and then in the middle they have character growth. And so those are like the kind of the main things that they were, trying to achieve throughout the course of the game. And then, sorry, I'm just kind of all over the place in my notes and my slides and stuff. But he told a lot of cool stories along the way. They were talking about when getting into the E3 reveal and deciding what should we do, and they have to plan this like 10 months out, right? They have to start figuring out what they're going to do. And so, of course, they went with, he said, of course, they went with the hardest option, which is to do a live demo rather than just a trailer or, a snippet of whatever. And they hadn't even figured out the beginning of the game at that point. There's a lot of other stuff that they still hadn't gotten put together. And he said that he had put together a pitch for their E3 presentation, and while he was giving the pitch, like all these higher level Sony people, he realized that it was crap. And he could look around the room and really see that everyone else thought it was crap too, and they were just being polite because nobody was getting excited for it.
Legitimately excited, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, I'm going to walk out of this room and they're all going to talk about behind my back about how crap this is. And so then he had to, kind of go back and like get them on the phone and kind of give them like a preliminary, like, okay, no, that was crap. We're going to do something different in order to convince them to all fly back in and give an all new pitch again. And one of the funniest things I think about the story is he was saying that the whole live orchestra reveal that started the whole press conference off.
Yeah.
He threw that in there as a joke. He was joking around, didn't expect that to be taken seriously, and one of the people in the room, their eyes lit up. And then, like, whatever weeks later, there's like, I've been, working on this and like making sure that, the live orchestra things happens. And he's like, what? And so now, not only does he have to do a live demo, but he's got to do a live demo, like, in conjunction with this orchestra happening.
Well, not to dive into it too much, but like that theme and the way they presented it to me also encapsulates just that game, the game that we ended up getting, where it's like we're listening to it and it's like, okay, we're all expecting God of War right now, and this sounds epic, not to use that word again, but it's reminding me of God of War, but it's not the theme. And like that's the game, this is the same, very similar experience, but there's so much new about it. And so it was not only just awesome to see live musicians and awesome to have Bear McCreary like get his moment.
Yeah.
It was neat it was an interesting way to introduce that. It kind of set the tone right off the bat for being like same but different.
But man, like
New world.
what incredible, I guess, strength that takes to have all these people fly in for you to be like. Okay, here's this thing that I really put my heart and soul into. They all think it sucks. I have the courage to get them all back out here, admit that, like put the blame entirely on myself and resell it. Like that's pretty remarkable. Like that's the only way something like this can happen.
And he talked about them having to be done with the demo like 2 weeks in advance and just constantly practicing it and rehearsing the demo and trying to get all the beats right. And he was saying that there were a lot of they put in the team put in a lot of fail safes. So like even though he was playing the game, that like he couldn't screw it up too badly, or like show off moves that they weren't ready to show yet, and so they kind of blocked things out or made things connect that wouldn't normally connect in the game. And then they also, while in rehearsals, they have to rehearse like what happens when the game crashes, what happens when it crashes twice.
Sure.
And like go through all of these scenarios.
Was it Black Flag that froze? Just straight up froze.
Right.
I remember the guy with the long hair that just went.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
And then he's talking about, he goes into these great detailed stories about, so now he's backstage at E3 and I forget who he said he was talking to. And then there's these curtains or whatever to get into the backstage area, and like someone just like this Japanese person just sticks their head and peeks through the curtains and just like looks around, and then their head pops back out and then they disappear. And then a few minutes later, like Kojima and this whole entourage come through, of course, and sit down at these tables, and then somebody from the entourage walks over and says, excuse me, we're so sorry. We are about to eat Panda Express. It will smell very bad. So all this stuff going through your head, and then this like surreal moment happens.
And like, how do you even respond to that? Like, oh, okay, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah. Back at GT, nobody would warn me that they were about to microwave fish. It's nice that.
Who's doing that?
I was across from the kitchen, man. Every now and then, it's fish and burnt popcorn.
Right.
And no one would own up to it. I would just walk out of my office. Who was it?
But he was so stressed out that he completely forgot, like he completely blanked on what he was supposed to do in that demo. Right when they were when it was about to happen and the orchestra was playing, he was I have no idea how this is about to start.
Yep. You just don't think about it. It goes with rehearsing anything. Yeah. Like once you actually start to, what am I? Yeah. Just let it go. You've done it enough.
Yeah, and there's just one point where he saw this cue on the music sheet or something like that, and he's like, okay, there it is. I've got it. He was ready. Yeah.
Performing's fun.
But yeah, so he's talking about imposter syndrome times 1,000, and he's talking about that you're always going to hear those voices of doubt, and he's like, remember that those voices are wrong, but sometimes they're right.
Yeah,
and it's
well, that solves everything.
It's up to you to trust yourself.
It's the same force that pulls you forward and keeps you honest, but it's also the same force that makes you feel terrible about yourself. And so it's such a hard balance.
Yeah, and he said on the other side of those walls of doubt, there's always something better.
Teach me, Corey.
Yeah. And then right before he started the Q&A, he was like, "Don't ask who blew the horn. It's like #1 rule: don't ask who blew the horn
Who blew the horn?
in God of War. Remember?
Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And he did. I think we've already heard this in a lot of interviews, but he talked about how like there's this whole thing with like when Atreus kind of gets bratty or whatever. That like there's this whole section that they ended up having to cut, and so that's why it kind of felt like a little disconnected. Although he says like I guess the animators like they did a lot of work to kind of help bring that feel back to actually make that less of a weird transition, and just like how Atreus like changed through those scenes.
Sure.
And then the favorite thing he had that was cut was the eagle in Helheim was like supposed to be a boss, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the last session. It was a good one, and then it was really funny because as I was walking out of there, it's like there's like again like the the whole people aspect of GDC that I was talking about earlier. Like I was able to I saw when I got up, Chris Kohler from Kotaku, who I've known for like 15 years or something now. I was able to chat with him a bit walking out, and then someone from the EZA community, while I was walking and talking with him, grabbed me and it's like, hey, can I like get a photo with you and talk to you for a bit? And so like while I'm talking to her, then they had like these breakout rooms to like continue Q&A if like people were going over. And so then like Corey's like leading this giant mass of people. And he's like, hey, Bloodworth, and like shakes my hand. It's like ping ponging, like again, just the amount of people that you see in such a short amount of time at GDC. But then I walked a few blocks away to another hotel to see Falcon Age, which is a pretty cool PlayStation VR and also non-VR game this time around from the same guys that did Dino Frontier. And so essentially the premise is that you're a character with a cute little falcon on your wrist, and you kind of work together to get through these situations. And at first the falcon is like young, but as you get through the game it grows up. But it sounds like you can also like, if you don't like the older bird, you can toggle back to the cute one.
Harsh, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they've done so many fun things to make that bird a character.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the trailers, you can
really just the GIFs, even just the GIFs that they put out are
like
so
little
fun.
Fist bumps with like you and the bird's talon, and like you have to pet the bird to kind of to heal it. Sometimes there'll be like turrets that shoot like tranquilizer type darts, and sort of like I guess similar to Last Guardian. One of the ways that like you heal the bird is by like pulling the darts out that are still stuck in it. And then one of the areas where you heal and stuff are like they have like water fountains that serve as like healing and save point. So it's like you get a little bit of rest and the bird gets to drink, and so you kind of use was just like a normal dual shock use like the left trigger to like just sort of point to where you want the bird to attack and target things, and then you personally can attack more short range and medium range with like this baton, but the baton also has like a whip, like an energy whip kind of thing. And so when you're playing in VR using the Move controller, that feels pretty good because you like lasso like a treasure chest and then yank it open.
Oh, nice.
So it's pretty cool, and the whole backdrop is the main dev is from Sri Lanka, and they've lived under like colonization and stuff like that, and so that kind of sort of informs like the game world as well. It's like these people who have been kind of pushed back and marginalized by like these robots that have come in and sort of taken over their world, and so you're sort of like a rebel fighter fighting back against these robots and like taking over like these factories and things and turning them back into farms for your people.
Cool.
So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of, again, fun little things with the bird. Like I put like a monocle on the bird, like little top hats and toys and all kinds of things. So there's like really like that pet aspect of the game, even though like the combat and stuff is all fairly simple. Like it just feels like it feels like there's a lot of love in the details.
Oh yeah, Moss does a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Where like Moss will turn to you and be like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, good job."
I
love that.
Yeah, Moss was the first thing that popped in my head too, and I really like this. I don't know if it's fair to call it a trend, but what I see in VR games where they try to get you attached to something in a way that only VR can. Like you wouldn't care as much if you couldn't have this thing get right up in your face or felt like you were holding on to it. That physicality, I think, just immediately makes you care a little bit more, and I think that's really cool that they're exploring that. But it's not just that. That would be enough for me, I think, to get into this game. But to hear there's this whole other layer to the story, I think really only makes it more fascinating.
Yeah, and the sort of mentor type figure that you have that kind of teaches you to work with the bird has this mean auntie personality. It's like I'm going to guide you, but you're going to grow up, kid, kind of thing.
Sure.
So.
Yeah,
cool.
Well, the narrator in Dino Frontier had a lot of attitude.
Oh
too.
yeah,
there was the old West vibe, and that was persistent the whole time.
The next game I got to play, I did not unfortunately get the best impression of because they lost their backpack and their laptop.
Oh no.
That was supposed to run the game.
GDC.
And so they had so they had a backup laptop, but it was like they were running out of it, some kind of crazy test version of the program that had to sit there and compile before I could play it and stuff. But it's called Lost Ember, and the people making it. And again, one of the reasons I went to see them is because they've been fans and supporters of Game Trailers and Easy Allies, and they've shot me preview builds in the past, and I never got to check out that preview build, but I was interested in that game. But sort of, I guess sort of the idea is that whatever people or civilization there were are long gone and extinct, and you're playing as this wolf that it's a reincarnation of one of those people, and so you still have some sort of recollection. You can explore the world and just try to figure out what happened to the world. But mechanically, what you're able to do is you're able to kind of transfer that soul into any other creatures that you see. So if you come up to a flock of birds, then you can transfer into a bird and you can fly around as a bird. If you come up to a herd of buffalo, you can transfer into the buffalo. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to be really interesting to see all these different dynamics and how the different creatures end up feeling to play.
Did the developer mention Ghost Trick at all? Because that's immediately what
they
I think
didn't mention it, no.
Yeah. Huh, okay.
But yeah, so that pretty much that's about all I got to see was a little bit of the wolf, the bird, and the buffalo. But
Cool.
And they had a trailer as well. But I think, that's coming out on PC, Xbox, and PS4 on July 19th. So it's not that far out.
Okay.
And then it'll come to Switch a bit later. The next thing I did after that was there's actually a Google Stadia demo nearby where we met up. So I got my hands on Assassin's Creed Odyssey on Stadia and played for 10 minutes. I think that there will be other games that will be a better sense of how that will really run, and obviously it's controlled situations, so who knows.
Sure.
But I think it played better than I expected it to. I really didn't feel like I was getting that much latency or lag or having a hard time
I guess
connecting with attacks. But again, that's a game where it's sort of it doesn't necessarily feel like it's immediate all the time anyways.
Yeah, you and I have talked about it before, Blood, where when you get a new high-end PC game, you just kind of keep trying to tweak your settings, and you're just constantly thinking about it, and you just can't get into the game because you want to make sure everything is just right. For me, this trick with Stadia is where you don't have that fiddling at all, or your mind just completely lets go, and you're just playing the game, and you're only concerned about what's happening within the game. Yeah,
and I think that's hard when you're going into a demo like that, because it's how much is my mind tricking me to look for, where is it?
Right.
Where is that latency? I'm trying to spot it.
It has to be there.
Yeah. But what I will say, even though I didn't feel like that was that noticeable, what is noticeable is just image quality. There's definitely a noticeable feel of blurriness and frame rate, being more choppy and not as crisp, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
It didn't have like the crazy macro blocking like I'll see on like a racing game when I upload a video to YouTube. But just like when you get into some of those finer details, it's like, I don't know what you mean by 4K. If this is supposed to be running at 4K, it doesn't feel like it. So
I guess the question that I have is like, what was the range and where was it most often? I mean, was it something?
It wasn't like it was fluctuating. It was just
Gotcha.
constantly like, I guess maybe at 30 or maybe a little bit under 30 kind of feeling, even though they were probably saying it was running at 60. It was just,
Sure.
just the way things moved and kind of just kind of like choppiness of like, okay, this line is going pop, 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 kind of, I don't know. It's not as, there's definitely like, it's definitely weird because it's not the same as a normal bad frame rate. Like it's its own thing that's a little bit different. So,
Okay.
but then again, it's like real world tests to be a whole nother ball game as well. But I think, going back to what we were saying with Microsoft, to me, it's more of like, okay, this is a supplemental solution. This is not like how I'm going to play all my games all the time. And maybe there's games where this makes more sense than others. So we'll have to see. I walked around their booth a little bit. A lot of this stuff was, more kind of talking about the same features that we saw in the press conference. One thing I will say is when I was talking to the Falcon Age guy, he was like, he has no idea like what that stupid retexturing technology that they showed off was supposed to be for. It's like, as an artist, like I don't want to do that. That's not going to help me at all. It's not going to help me put my game together. So it just seems to be like this weird, like showy gimmick in a way.
Yeah, showy for sure, but the way that they were describing it was like, this will make your life simpler, and so it's fun to hear from actual developers like, nope, don't want to do that.
Yeah,
like,
they even had it was funny, like remember how like one of the last things they showed was like the Pac-Man map, and they had a guy walking around in a suit that was like Pac-Man textured.
Okay.
They also had Pac-Man walking around like it was Disney World.
Okay. Okay.
So
that's the only word I can come
the
up
other
with
thing, I didn't actually get up to it to see the full demo, but I also saw a thing in there about implementing ads into your games, like kind of like the kind of things you'd expect on YouTube. Like
No.
So this is the kind of stuff that Google is looking at.
The ads on YouTube are horrendous already. Like if I hear another ad for Snagit, I'm gonna lose my mind. And then they kick you in the teeth even more because you'll see like a series of these ads, and then it will come up with a thing and it'll be like, do you want to skip these? Get our premium thing. And it's just so egregious. Like to think of that happening in a game, which is like way more precious to me than YouTube videos. Like, no. Because then they'll probably have a thing where you can skip that stuff and you got to pay more money. It's hard not being cynical about this.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard because it's like, obviously like a lot of people are going, we're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see where everyone's strategies and directions are.
Right.
But it's like, Google, you've got to like show me like why it's worth it.
Yeah.
Why is it worth going through these hoops and getting on your store and everything or whatever you're going to have set up?
I feel like the more you compare it to YouTube, the less. No.
And then the last thing I did, I saw two games with a French developer called Dear Villagers, who recently went through rebranding. When I saw them last year, they were named Palladius, and they put out that Away Journey to the Unexpected. They put out Old School Musical. So they're calling them Dear Villagers now. They're really they talked about wanting to be essentially more focused. And so rather than doing a lot of small titles, they want to do fewer but more kind of medium. I think you like even used the word like AA titles or something at some point. And so I saw two games there. One of them was called Scourge Bringer, which is kind of like a roguelite platformer. He's saying something about 20-ish hours. It's going to come out in 2020. And then trying to think. Oh, one thing I remember is like it was kind of like atmospheric music or whatever when he was going around the world, but then as soon as you like got into combat with enemies, like just starts blaring like this loud metal music. So
Yes.
it's definitely got some attitude
Excellent.
going on it.
Excellent.
And there's like a mix of like enemies were kind of more prone to like either like slashing them or bashing them or like shooting from a distance. And I think he said that like all the abilities will be like unlocked from the start. So like you won't earn abilities. It's just a matter of learning to use them in different contexts. The other game, which is the main one I went to see, was Recompile, which is they revealed it pretty recently, so it's getting a little bit of buzz. But it's like a 3D platformer, and it's like one of those games where like the world is kind of forming out of blocks or whatever, like as you're walking into spaces, and so part of it is just trying to like identify like what the right direction, what the right route is, and your character is like I think like a sentient program, and it kind of looks like this kind of like flaming guy with like their legs kind of trail off, but it's a really interesting looking game, and they talked about they're gonna have 5 different endings based on whether you kill everything or like you take like a more peaceful approach to getting through the game.
I have to immediately think of Undertale with that.
Yeah. And then some of the different abilities that I got, there was like kind of an air dash. There was like kind of an infinite quote unquote double jump that sort of felt like Space Jump from Metroid. And then trying to think about what else. If you wait, is this what I'm thinking of? Oh yeah, so that's another. Sorry. I'm just like looking at my notes and trying to like make sure that I'm not like skip the page to a different game. When you fall from a height, that can like create like a blast zone to damage enemies nearby. But you also, what was a little weird to me, is you also have like guns. So you pull out a gun and get into kind of like a third-person shooting combat, and there's like 3 different gun types. 6 abilities, and it's not that long. It's like 8 to 10 hours. There's also hacking in the game, but it wasn't in the demo yet.
Okay.
So the footage will probably look a little bit better than me trying to explain it. I do remember there's a lot of recoil like on the rifle, so just like trying to be like very deliberate. But I only got to use the one gun, I think. And then they also have I wasn't able to play it there, but they have an early access right now. Is Edge of Eternity. Have you seen this?
I have not.
It's kind of being done in like a JRPG style. Super long game, like 50 hours, and it's going to release in 2020, but it's already in early access and doing pretty well, and has a lot of interesting, cool creature designs.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
So, but yeah.
One man.
Pretty much it.
Yeah. One man.
Yeah, well, that was
in San Francisco.
GDC.
Yeah, I went quite a bit over what I was hoping in terms of time, but
Did you become a Nintendo employee along the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not this year.
Not. That was a good response to that.
The fear every single time we said it.
Yeah. I believe it. It's gonna happen at some point.
I did get to
have
say
whatever
hi
you
to
want.
Kit and Krista.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
Cool.
who are like minor YouTube celebrities themselves now, which is funny.
Did they tell you to join the dark side?
No.
Okay. But yeah, you covered so much, and that's nice. It was. Cool.
I can only
Bunch
hope
of
that I
different
wasn't
things.
just droning on and on, but
Yeah.
I probably was.
It's
Well,
okay.
you were, but it's about video games.
Yeah,
That's what we're here
droning
for.
on
Blood.
about. Yeah.
Well, that's our jobs.
Yeah.
We're here to drone. We're here to listen about droning.
Yeah.
We're here to, stoked me playing these games.
Now I don't have to do a frame trap this week.
Totally,
'cause
yeah,
we
sold.
can't-
Well, thank you guys for humoring me. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to get as a takeaway or wrap it up with, but
No, just a lot of things. It's been hard because like I feel like a list of games where it's like, okay, everybody's going to be checking this out. These are the obvious games that everyone wants. And then I have like kind of my own things that I'm interested in, sequels to stuff that I've played or wanted to check out more. And I feel like you kind of added a whole nother layer where it's like, oh man, these would have slipped through the cracks. A lot of these or most of these. And so it's good to hear you describe them and to kind of get a mental picture. And so it's like, okay, this is at least a little bit on my radar now. And so I appreciate that.
Cool.
I also enjoyed the description, and then you see the trailer later, and it's like, there we go.
Yeah.
That's the Blood, right. That's
Clicks.
that game that
Yeah.
Blood, yes, with the machine gun shooting down. Yes.
Yeah, I do have a little bit of B-roll. I don't know if I have B-roll for everything, but there's something like my actual DeMagnete footage they sent over. So for me playing that. So
Thanks, Bud.
Thanks, Blood.
thank you.